So I'm going to go over a few more concepts that were covered in the modules. If you have a good understanding of them, you don't have to watch this, but let's talk about in-group bias. So, before we start talking about prejudice and everything else, we really have to talk about how we categorize us versus them. It is a phenomenon that, is deeply embedded in our biology. We just do it automatically. So let's talk in-group in-group bias. And so in-group bias is us, right? And a lot of times the discrimination that often occurs because of in-group favoritism rather than out-group hostility. So an example of this was shown whenever we talked about the medical students who had actually like explicit beliefs about pain perception or whatever, but also the people who had implicit bias, even if they didn't have the explicit beliefs, were more likely to treat the pain of white patients than Black patients. And it wasn't in that particular experiment, it wasn't that they were under-treating the Black patients, it was actually that they were over-treating the white patients because they felt what they were feeling, right? And so it was really that in-group favoritism, that preference, that resulted in discrimination. You also see this whenever for college applications and acceptance, right? If someone who's reviewing your application played the tuba or belonged to a certain group or whatever, and then you have those same traits, they're probably going to fight a lot harder for you. Now, the caveat is that in-group preference interacts with one's social learning about the relative status of one's own group. So here's where things get tricky. So adult members of non-dominant groups show weak or no implicit preference. And you also see this in med school applications and letters of recommendation. The lack of really, this favoritism thing, because, we are conditioned to really cheer on the dominant social categories. So this happens even young. I'll read this. A study with Hispanic children as young as age 5 and who grew up in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood showed no preference for their in-group when compared with the white majority. Interestingly, these same Hispanic children did show in-group preference when comparing their group to Black Americans. This result is noteworthy because it demonstrates that even children's implicit attitudes are sensitive to which of two outgroups is socio-culturally advantaged. And then the relevant areas in the brain, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, or the orbital frontal cortex, which is like a piece of that. This is activated in like more of a thinking intentionally, trying to categorize things. Like the amygdala is automatic, but this part is actually like when you're trying to be thoughtful and reflective of things, particularly related to social interactions of in-group and out-group. Here's an example of in-group bias. The things that I want you to remember from this are that, one, when we're comparing children and adults, you can see that in each group, it's kind of similar. And that's because this in-group, out-group, in-group bias occurs really, really young. And it's pretty stable after a certain point. And we'll talk about when that certain point is. But the other thing that you see is that dominant groups show pretty significant in-group bias, right? Non-dominant, not so much. So this has implications, right? This has implications for who stays in power, right? Because these biases probably affect our behavior, right? They definitely affect our emotions about people, our perceptions, our assumptions. And we tend to root for our own team, especially if our team has the power. And this occurs early. So infants, even infants, prefer the face of a primary caregiver. They prefer the sound of their native language. They prefer women's faces and racial in-group members from a very early age. So do we need to just give up because like this is embedded from a very early age? Are we just born racist? No. Remember, the research subjects were part of the culture in which we live. So initially, yes, on the studies, infants do prefer maternal caregivers. They do prefer their own race. They do prefer the sound of their native language, but that's only if that's all that they've heard. And there is like a window of opportunity by which, like, if they're exposed to a more heterogeneous population, caregiver, language, they don't have that preference actually. So if the father, a male caregiver, is also involved in their care from an early age, they don't have a preference for women's spaces or their mother's spaces. If they are exposed to different people of different races, they don't have a race preference actually. So good news. The other biological correlate that's involved in some of this is oxytocin. So oxytocin, you know, as like the love hormone, the empathy hormone, the also stress hormone, right? It's involved in the stress response in ways we don't quite completely understand because it has more of a female kind of association with it, right? So oxytocin doesn't just make you love everyone. It actually makes you really, really strongly prefer your in-group. But it also makes you more aggressive, more likely to separate yourself or behave in a way towards outgroup members. So oxytocin isn't just like a lovey-dovey hormone. It protects us. It's about us, not them. So we do have an outgroup homogeneity bias. We tend to think more categorically about them. They're all, and we're individuals, right? We also tend to think a little bit more negatively about them. We group them as negative, right? And so if we go back to the stereotype lecture, that makes sense because we tend to remember negative things, right? We tend to remember emotionally charged things, especially the negative emotions, right? And if we group them as a category, then of course they are associated with these negative things. And we'll also talk about the insula because this is very much involved in that outgroup negative feeling. So your insula is a part of your brain that deals with like visceral feeling, like pain, and disgust, like nausea. Like you can trigger someone's insula by like setting them next to a trash can, but it also is involved in processing social pain. So like embarrassment or being left out of something, like that kind of pain. And also like disgust with outgroups. And so the insula definitely is lights up with more outgroup negative feelings. This was in your module, so I won't go over it again, but this like is tribalism, right? The insula is all over this. And we are hardwired to prefer us versus them, but we also feel happy when we get something, and we feel very envious, and our insula is actually triggered. So maybe even disgust when they get something that we don't get. But the thing is that we can change these categories. They're not like set in stone, even though we're going to talk about race and class and all of that. You can change the perception of someone or tell them to pay attention to a different thing. And then, the categories totally change, right? Like if they have on the same sports jersey of your favorite team, then all of a sudden they're an us, not a them. And your brain doesn't react the same either. Fairness, we went over this during one of the last lectures, but this is related to that insula again. So outgroup homogeneity bias. This is whenever we are focusing on, faces, we tend to group thems as one general thing, and we don't really even recognize their facial differences. That has significant implications on like juries and, eyewitness testimony, right? Especially if there are thems that they're testifying against. So this outgroup homogeneity bias is really what's responsible for this whole, they all look the same. So of course, we're not going to talk about that out loud, right? But there's a real biological reason why thems all look the same. It's not, it's kind of a function of racism because it's probably a function of segregation, right? If you didn't have, if you grew up around a homogenous culture that looked like yourself, that was probably due to like structural racism or whatever. But at an individual level, it's not because you're trying to be mean or you think bad things about another group. It's just because our brains don't process thems as individuals. We process thems as groups. And so the area involved in this is the fusiform face area. We even have different pathways that get triggered in our brain to process this, and this happens very quickly. So before we even are aware that we saw something, so 100 milliseconds after seeing a face, we have already placed them in a social category. And then we have potentially thought of our behavior or triggered some behavior that reacts to that. And then it takes a little bit longer before we can actually critically think and be aware of some of the hypocrisy or contradictions in our initial reaction. And it takes even longer to adjust our behavior accordingly. And we'll talk about this more. So we have this concept of perceptual narrowing, and this is another form of like a critical window of vulnerability where racial bias does begin at younger age, but it's only without experience with other race individuals. And so birth to 6 months, they can identify different facial features in different social categories. They can identify different facial features in different animals even. But by about 9 months, they lose that ability to do so. And they usually recognize differences within their own group if they weren't exposed to others. Now, there is still some plasticity. So during childhood, if you have a lot of exposure to thems, then potentially you can reverse some of this. But by adulthood, if you grew up segregated, which most of this country is, and you didn't get a whole lot of exposure, it's going to be something that you have to actually work for. It's like, when you're young and you grew up in a bilingual household, then it comes naturally. But once you're older, you're never going to lose your childhood accent. You're going to have to just like translate the language in your head, right? It's not going to be as natural. And so you have to put work in. But it's worth it, I think. So this is just another chart that shows that racialism happens early. So even babies prefer their own in-group race if they aren't exposed to an out-group. But really by like 3 to 4 years, they've already formed, prejudice. They already formed ideas, explicit, thoughts about other groups, and they're usually negative, especially if they're outgroup. The caveats. So again, the grouping can be arbitrary, which is really cool. If you give people the right motivation, they will also pay attention to the outgroup. So let's go back to the grouping can be arbitrary. When people were told to like focus on race, it was really hard to identify outgroup members. But then if they were told to focus on, the people wearing an orange shirt or whatever, some kind of arbitrary grouping, and they were told that those people are also on your team, the race didn't matter anymore. It was actually like they still had issues differentiating outgroup members, but it was like a totally like blue versus orange shirts or something. It was, it had nothing to do with race. And then if you give people the right motivation, they will pay attention to the outgroup. So another study actually gave people the task of either being soldiers or spies. And so, the soldiers still had the same, like they had to remember the in-group members, and they were able to do so based on arbitrary groupings. But the spies also had to be able to remember the out-group members because they were trying to infiltrate or whatever. And they were able to do so. So if we, attend to those differences, even in out-groups, we can still differentiate things. It's just the automatic processes are what, we have to work on. Or we could just regroup ourselves. And then if you pay attention to it. And so they told people about this phenomenon before a research study, and it actually helped. It helped decrease some of that in-group bias and out-group homogeneity bias. So good news all around. Yes, we are racialized early because, the way that our society is structured, not because of some innate biological thing. Yes, there is some innate biological thing that is responsible for this in-grouping and out-grouping, but again, it's the culture and the society and the history and everything that plays a role in this. And so the initial studies made it seem like we are all kind of born racist, but we're not racist until 9 months. And we can work on it as long as we can regroup and reshuffle things, pay attention, or, make an active intentional effort to pay attention to outgroup members.